Well, good afternoon and good morning. Welcome to the June 2024 USDA Acreage and Quarterly Grain Stocks Report webinar here at DTN. My name is Greg Horstmeyer. I'm Editor-in-Chief, and I'll be your moderator today. With me, as always, is Todd Hultman, our lead market analyst, who'll be sharing his insights into these acreage numbers and especially the grain stocks numbers that we just got a few moments ago. I'll remind that everybody is in a listen-only mode. You can ask questions at any time during the event, and to do this, click on the Q&A option that's on the bottom right of your screen. That'll open up a panel and you can type questions into there and submit them. We'll gather them throughout the event. And then at the end of the webinar, after Todd finishes his comments, we'll go through some of the questions that came in and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. This event is being recorded and a rebroadcast link will be on the DTN website within 2 business days. And that web address is dtn.com. And I'll remind everybody of that at the end of the webinar. So again, you're in a listen-only mode. Please submit questions as you think of them, though, so that we can get them prepared. And with that, we're ready to begin. I'll turn things over to Todd. Todd, the acres came in a little bit higher than what most analysts anticipated, and corn took a bit of a hit. What do you make of it?
Well, there's always so much uncertainty surrounding this report, Greg, that on one hand, it's hard to be too surprised about anything. Well, I'll get into the details a little more, but I think it's probably no shock to anybody that USDA did come up with a little higher corn estimate than expected, and I'll talk about why in just a second. So hello, everybody. Thank you, Greg. Thanks for joining us. We're going to take a look at today's June 28 acreage and grain stocks report. Typically, the acreage report has a very good track record of offering estimates that are close to what end up being the final planted totals. The exception is when we have weather problems, and I would put this year in that category. And of course, 2019 was the poster child of weather problems that really kind of messed up the acreage estimates in June. So I would call this a minor version of 2019, I think, that we're going to be dealing with here. As Greg just mentioned, 91.5 million acres of corn plantings are higher than expected. And I'll go ahead and show the estimates for the day. And we have the history track record there. Of course, corn continues to be the most popular crop of the 3 big crops. Wheat continues on its long-term downtrend. It's been very tough to make profits in wheat the past couple decades. And soybeans are maintaining some equity with corn, but corn is still king for the moment. I was starting to say how weather problems interrupt. Keep in mind in this report, what the survey that USDA does is in the first 2 weeks of June. So the flooding that happened since the first 2 weeks, or just last weekend, roughly 10 days ago, is not included in this. But even if it were, it might not change the planting estimate, because the way USDA counts corn planted acres is if that field got planted once, then it's counted. It's part of the planting estimate. It doesn't matter if the field then later got hailed out or flooded or hit by tornado or whatever that ruined the field. But if it was planted once, it gets included in the planting estimate. As you know, we've had a lot of harsh, stormy spring weather conditions this year, even before last weekend's flooding. We've seen, I think, a record number of tornadoes. We've seen lots of hail damage. And before the flooding even came, we had very concerns about very wet conditions in southern Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin with water standing in fields. So there's going to be a lot of challenge in taking what we learned today and still trying to figure out how much corn production we're going to come up with this fall. We're still a long ways, and with the numbers today, we're not a lot closer, to be honest. I can't say we've learned a lot, but this is definitely a more solid survey than the intentions report we get in March. So This does carry a little more weight with it, but as I say, given the weather problems, there's a lot of asterisks around the numbers we're seeing today. Okay, 91.5 million for corn, 86.1 million acres for soybeans. That was a little less than expected. Trade was looking for about 86.9 million acres. Some anticipation that corn acres were switched to soybeans, and that may have happened. But the overall total came out less than expected. Wheat acres 47.2 is down a couple million from last year and is slightly below today's estimate. So that came up a little short on the estimates today too. The other thing I want to point out, the three crop total of those three crops, 224 million acres, that's down 3 million from last year. And the obvious question is, well, what happened to those 3 million acres? And I don't have a good answer, to be honest. But I can also tell you that the principal acres, which we'll look at in a bit, were down when we look at all the crops that were planted, or all the principal crops that were planted. So this is the start we have, and of course the planting estimate hit the market a bit hard, but also we had a bearish number on the corn stocks, which we'll get to in a minute. But first, here's a few more details. Ever since 2019, one of the improvements USDA made to their report was that they also now publish how many acres were not yet planted, but that they expected to be at the time of the survey. And here for today's report, you see in the red rectangle there, we have 3.4 million corn acres not yet planted, but that were expected to be, which is part of the 91.5 million total. Now, typically when things are normal and weather is not a significant problem, typically when we get to the survey time, we have about 2 to 2.5 million acres of corn not yet planted. That's what I would call a normal base for unplanted acres. But here at 3.4, that's a little bit elevated from what we would normally see. And I put a little asterisk next to 2022. If you look at that year, we had 4 million acres of corn not yet planted during the survey period. Well, we had a situation of very wet weather that year. And in fact, USDA did a second survey, a planting survey in the Dakotas and Minnesota in the month of August. I expect USDA will probably do another planting survey in August. I didn't see it noted in this report. And of course, I didn't have time to listen to the USDA webinar that came out because I was busy getting all this together. But it won't surprise me if we see another planting survey taken in, at least for some select states in the upper Midwest, and definitely Minnesota, I think, would have to be part of that. But I would hope they'd also maybe include Iowa and South Dakota and Wisconsin. But we'll see how that goes. But wouldn't be surprised if we don't see another planting survey in August. For soybeans, 12.8 million acres were not yet planted, and that's higher than normal. As you can see, we had previous years where there was only 8 or 10 million acres not yet planted, and in 2022 we had 15.8. So again, it just shows the weather issues that we're having here, and the possible changes that we could see in the planting estimates ahead. These are, I would call, the acres at risk. Just a little state-by-state breakout. I won't get into a lot of details, but I did want to point out the highest yielding states and what happened between acres last year and this year. Iowa remains the king of corn acres, 13.1 million. That's the same planting they had a year ago when the national planting was much higher. It was over 94 million acres last year. In Illinois, 10.9 million acres this year is down a little bit from 11.2 last year. In Minnesota, you have 8.1 million acres this year. That's down from 8.6 last year. And in Nebraska, we have a little more corn acres at 10.10 million this year. So that doesn't necessarily show the overall drop that we have from, I think it's 94.6 million a year ago. So it looks like probably more of the reduction came from what I would call the lower yielding states. So it's most of the drop was outside of Iowa and Illinois. For soybean plantings, we can see that the king of soybean acres, again, is Illinois with 10.7 million acres. That's up just a little bit from last year's 10.35. Iowa was very similar to what they had last year. They're still at 9.9 million acres. In Minnesota, they had a few more, 7.6 million acres compared to last year's 7.35. And in North Dakota, they bumped up a little more. Last year, they were in the number 4 spot at 6.2. This year, they're in the number 4 spot at 6.8. That's another wet state. And as we've talked about before, lots of times North Dakota has lower yields up in its climate that it does. So it doesn't quite have the same wallop as what we see in Iowa and Illinois. Of course, what states do, huh? Okay, wheat plantings. Overall, the wheat acres came in a little bit less than expected. 47.2 is the total wheat estimate in this report. Winter wheat acres came in at 33.8. That's down from 36.7 million a year ago. So even though our winter wheat conditions are much better than they were a year ago in terms of soil moisture, especially in the Western Plains, the overall planted acres are down. In other spring wheat, it showed up at 11.3 million acres this time around. That's just slightly higher than last year's 11.2 total. And we saw a bit of a jump in the durum acres, 2.17 million versus last year's 1.68. So no big surprises there, but slightly friendly for the wheat numbers. The spring wheat plantings, North Dakota obviously is the dominant state for the spring wheat crop, and their acres stayed fairly the same, 5.6 million this year. That's just up slightly from a year ago. The second biggest state in terms of acres, Montana, reduced their plantings a bit to 2.45 million, down from 2.7 million a year ago. And then in Minnesota, there was a slight increase to 1.55 million acres there. So fairly stable situation. And I've got a bad number there. It says other spring wheat acres equals 10.6 million. Actually, it's 11.3 million. So sorry about that. Okay, here's the smaller crops and where I wanted to point out the change in principal crops overall. The principal crop total is down 4.4 million this year, 315.2 million acres, down from 319.6 a year ago. And again, where did they go? I don't frankly know. We did not see that big of an increase in CRP acres or anything like that. But that's how the total works out this year. And of course, we're always gradually losing acres to suburbanization and things like that. But why the 4.4 million drop this year? I don't have a good answer for that, unfortunately. Of the minor or lesser crops below the big three, of course, cotton takes up the most planted acres, and they are showing a rare increase this year. 11.67 million acres for cotton is up from 10.2 a year ago. In sorghum and barley, we're seeing lower acres this year. Rice, a slight increase, pretty much the same. A bit of a decrease in oats, and canola is another one that's up a little bit, 2.66 million acres versus 2.3. Rye is slightly lower. Sunflowers are under 1 million acres this time around, and sugar beets are roughly the same, 1.1 million acres. So no big changes, I would say, other than we did get a bit of an increase in the cotton acres. Oops, wrong way. Okay, let's take a look at the June 1 grain stocks numbers. And we can see right off the bat with corn, it came in higher than expected. 4.99 billion bushels of corn on hand June 1st. Of all the numbers today, this is the one that surprises me and makes me scratch my head the most. Now, I'm not surprised that it's up from a year ago. Obviously, we've got a lot more corn this year than we've had the last few years. In fact, this is the highest total in 4 years. The average trade guess was looking for 4.87 billion bushels. The thing that surprises me the most about this number is that if you plug it into the overall corn picture, having this much corn left on this date means that we've used up 11.73 billion bushels of corn in the first 3 quarters of this season. Now, that's actually a couple 100 million bushels less than what we saw 2 and 3 seasons ago when our corn supplies were much lower. And the reason that surprises me is, that was much more expensive corn. That was $6 plus corn. Now we're talking about $4 corn, and we've had very good export, well, I should say better export demand, much better export demand than we did a year ago. We've had good ethanol demand. Ethanol production's up roughly 4% from a year ago. And as far as I can tell, we've had very good feed demand. If you look at the counties that have a lot of livestock, you see a very strong corn basis, just as you see very strong corn bids throughout the state of Iowa, especially where ethanol plants are active. So I guess it baffles me that we did not see a higher demand total bring the corn stocks down lower than expected this time around. The one thing I will say also about corn is that the other thing folks had their eye on was the amount of corn on farm. And back in March, there was just over 5 billion bushels of corn in storage on the farm, and that was higher than normal. This time around, it's 3.03 billion bushels, which is up roughly 800 million bushels from a year ago. So it's somewhat in line with having the higher corn stocks, but it does still show that farmers are still holding on to, or at least have in their possession, a significant share of the remaining corn supply. So we have a situation in the market where the managed futures funds are heavily short. They're betting on lower prices. They're winning today with this report. But at the same time, we have our producers who believe in a higher value for corn. They're holding stubborn so far, and it'll be interesting to see how this comes out. As I say, we still have a lot to learn about what production is going to look like in the year ahead. And for the most part, we've had a very strong support system of demand underneath us. So now we're getting to some very tight or extreme, historically low prices if we factor in the inflation that we've had the past few years since COVID. So it's going to be kind of an interesting situation here if the corn market stays as bearish as it is looking today through the rest of the summer. Soybean stocks. Soybeans came in at 970 million bushels today. That's up from 796 million bushels a year ago. That was slightly higher than the trade was expecting, 957 million bushels, but it's not far off of expectations. And just by a narrow margin, this is the highest ending or June 1 soybean stocks total in 4 years. So I would say no big shock there. Probably a neutral effect for the market on today's soybean number. And lastly, for wheat stocks, I would also call that neutral for the day. 702 million bushels of June 1 wheat stocks. Now the trade was looking for 682, and USDA estimated 688 million bushels of ending stocks just earlier this month. But 702 is probably in line here, and there could still be some adjustment if we find out more about exports and how that turned out. But this should be the ending number here. Now, there's two ways we can look at this number. We can say it's the highest in 3 years, which it is. But also, if you look back a little farther in the history for this date, it's also the third lowest in 10 years. So this is not what I would call an extraordinarily bearish or burdensome wheat market that we're looking at yet. It's supplies are comfortable, but they're certainly not the highest among the highest they've been. They're actually more in line with what we saw the past few years. In conclusion, not a lot of numbers today, but some of these are very strong numbers. Obviously, the higher corn acres and corn stocks combination is bearish. And in fact, while we're at it, I can just say that December corn's trading down 14.5 cents as we speak. November beans are down 3.25, and it looks like the wheat markets are down 8 to 13 cents. So overall, we're seeing a bit of a bearish response here, but corn definitely coming in with the more heavier bearish numbers for the day. Soybeans, I'm calling it a neutral report for the day. The acres were a little less than expected. Soybean stocks were slightly higher than expected, but overall, I think it was a wash and close to expectations. And again, neutral for wheat with acres slightly less and the ending stocks slightly more than expected. So that is our June 28 USDA acreage and grain stocks report, and I'm glad to take questions.
Yeah, remind everybody that you can use that Q&A bar to put any questions in that you have. A couple of folks have had some trouble getting in, but glad you're able to get in. Todd, I would just throw the question out while we're waiting on some to come in terms of this push and pull with producers. It was interesting to see that higher than last year corn on farms, and even corn off farm storage was slightly higher. How do you see that playing out over the next couple of months as this crop continues to grow?
Well, that's a very good question. And actually, Katie Dellinger was asking me about that today because she's going to be writing on that Monday. But the bottom line, I think, is we have an old-fashioned standoff here, and we have producers who are facing prices that are well below their production cost. And in many cases, they're still in good cash position from the last few years. And so I think there's some backbone and stubbornness there to try to wait this thing out. And obviously, I'm rooting for them, and they're up against specs that are heavily short. And the interesting thing about this situation, Greg, is usually the spec market kind of all goes along together. But in this case, it's specifically the managed futures funds that are heavily net short over 200,000 contracts. If you look at the rest of the large specs in the market, they're actually net long. So it's the futures funds that are by themselves net short on this bearish island, betting on lower prices, and they have obviously been a strong force in pushing down prices this month. So it looks to me like another one of these things where if you can have the patience to let reality play out, just maybe by the time we get to August or September, we'll have better handles on what this year's production is going to be, because I don't think you want to take 91.5 million acres times a record yield right now and just assume that we're going to have a 15 billion bushel crop. I I think, if you look outside and take a drive around through the upper Midwest, you might have a different view of that.
Yeah. Question comes in. Do you think this 91.5 million acres is going to be the high of the year? Do you think that's the top end?
As far as the planted estimate, I do. And really from this point on, I think in a lot of ways, the market won't even care about that. The number we're really concerned about is the harvested acre, right? So we're looking at, we don't really care what was initially planted. We want to know how are those fields looking now and what's the potential for those fields now. And that's where it comes down to. In August, we'll get the prevented plantings report of the acres that didn't get planted, and that total should be elevated from a year ago. But we should also have reports of acres that just fail. So either they'll pull down the yield estimate at some point, or they'll just put them in the unharvested acre category and lower the harvested acre estimates. But however they do it, by the time we get to August or September, I would think there would be some downward revisions in the production expectation.
Good point. In the flooding and things that we're seeing right now add to that.
Yeah. Now keep in mind every acre underwater is still counted as a planted acre at this moment. And we've had flooding before, and sometimes there will be fields that survive. And but of course, a lot of fields will survive with lower yields, or some fields won't survive. So we're going to have a wide range again of things to look at when it comes to crop tour season again this year. And it's it's not going to be easy to sort that out. It's going to take some time to put that all together.
Question on global demand. Do you see any bounce back due to global demand? I guess at these lower prices and prices continue to drop. Do you see that export demand picking up?
Our export demand has done better this year. It's not quite up to the 4-year average, but certainly better than a year ago. And of course, it's easier to sell $4 corn to the world than it is to sell $6 corn. So that's part of what's helping things here. But we also have a corn crop in Brazil that's going to turn out lower this year than it was last year. They had their weather challenges this year, and uh, there's still disagreement about what that production number will be. But overall, it's I think there's no argument that the corn production out of Brazil is lower this year, and so it seems like we're getting a little longer season of export interest because of that.
Great. Any other questions can come in. If not, Todd, I think those are the questions that we have for today. I would just note that on the comments you made about the flooding and sort of what's happened in the last week to 10 days, we're going to be looking at that on the DTN digital websites in terms of what the change has been to the drought monitor maps and how that's changed in the last couple of weeks, and where some of these rainfall totals have landed. Talking with John Baranek, our meteorologist today, and there's a lot of areas where there's too much rain, and we've seen that in the flooding, but there's also a lot of areas where further to the east, that rain has actually been pretty nice. By the time it gets there, it's not been heavy. It's been just what folks are looking for. So that's going to improve the crop, but also potentially improve the bearishness of what's going on. So I'd recommend everybody watch for those pieces coming out this next week. Anything else, Todd, for the group? Well, we got a question coming in. Will South America's crop be similar to last year's due to the increased production? Do you expect this coming South America crop to be similar to last year's, I think is what they're asking.
We're almost always going to anticipate a larger crop off of the bat because Brazil continues to increase their acreage available for cropland, and we have a very big increase anticipated, or I should say USDA has a very big increase anticipated for Brazil soybean production in the year ahead. And I don't recall if you give me a second, let me look at the corn number. Anticipated 127, and this year we're looking at around 115. So yeah, there's another almost 10% increase anticipated for corn production next year. And of course, they don't plant that till fall, so we haven't even got into weather challenges there yet.
Yep. Oh, great. Good. Looking here. I think that might have been the last question that came in. I want to thank everybody that participated, and thank you for the questions, and especially thank you, Todd, for pulling all this together and having these thoughts for us. I'll remind everybody that this event is recorded, so if you want to go back and listen to it, or if there are others in your organization that you would like to have listen to it, a rebroadcast link will be up on our website, and that's at www.dtn.com within 2 business days, so early next week. Go to the events section on the website, just like you sign up for this webinar, and you should find the rebroadcast link. I'll remind you that if you have other questions, Todd's email is up there on the screen. Please email us if you have follow-ups or things that you're interested in. We love to hear from you. couple of other reminders. Our next markets webinar will be July 12th. That'll be the July WASDE webinar. We'll be holding it at this same time frame on July the 12th. Next week is a short markets week with the Independence Day holiday. So markets will be closed there, and the DTN newsroom and a lot of other DTN departments will be closed for the holiday there. So this concludes our event today. Please have a great weekend. Be safe with the fireworks next week. We really appreciate you participating in this. It's your participation that make these webinars really fruitful. So thanks so much and have a great weekend.
Thanks, everybody.